So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first panel for the second day at GMASA. All of us are, thrilled to be here and see so many of you in the audience. I think till about an hour back, we were worried that we would be talking to each other. So good to see you all here. I'll just start with a quick round of, introductions of the panel members. I'll let Rohan start.
Sure. So as she said, my name is Rohan. I'm the Managing Director of Uplift in India. Uplift is a mobile ad tech company. We focus on maximizing LTV for mobile apps. In India, we have an office in Bangalore, and we are a global company with a headquarters in Berlin, Germany.
I'm Chris Steedman. I'm the Managing Director for MNC Saatchi Mobile. We've been a mobile agency for, it's our 10th year globally. Started in London, and we've got 8 offices around the world now. This year we set up 2 offices in India, Bangalore here and in Delhi, and we're very much on the agency side. We partner up with mobile-first businesses to help them navigate the murky world of mobile advertising.
Hello, my name is Joana Picq. I run international at JAMP. JAMP, we've been running for 4 years, and we've historically basically been OLX's main partner to acquire and engage users. We're an ad tech company. And we specialize in non-gaming, so we're pretty much e-commerce, classifieds, travel, etc. And I am based in South Africa, so we were just saying I'm probably one of the people who traveled furthest to be here. And I'm French-Brazilian, and we're pretty much based in Argentina, US, Europe, so we're kind of quite global. So hopefully I help with a bit more of a not just India perspective.
And first of all, good to see such a huge listeners that have come to see what we are talking about today. So I am Neeraj Mohan Sharma. I head the India business for Mobvista. We are a global advertising platform, majorly helping on the spenders out there in terms of acquiring new users for their apps. And yes, means we have certain solutions which could actually help you to talk about like what we talk about, let's say the LTV or the re-engagement of the users. So that's something that we'll be doing today. Thank you.
Great. I'm Vasuta. I head the India business for InMobi. InMobi is a global mobile advertising platform. We are pretty much, in 15 countries across the globe. We serve about 1.5 billion users on a monthly basis. And I look at the India side of things for InMobi. So thanks. We'll get started with, the panel then. So as you all would have heard in the introduction, the topic is simple techniques to improve user LTV and re-engage users. I think I'll start, maybe give everyone an opportunity to talk a couple of minutes about the topic itself, given that we have various people from the ad tech space. Joe can add a global perspective, and Chris, who brings in a lot of information from the agency side of things. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to just add your thoughts to the topic.
So techniques to maximize LTV, right, and re-engage users. So I think a mobile app goes through a journey where the first phase is a lot of focus on launching the app properly. Then it's the growth phase, and then finally it's the retain phase. So during all these phases, there's emphasis to maximize LTV. There's an emphasis on different aspects to maximize LTV. So I think during the LTV phase, a mobile app has to focus a lot on understanding who his user is, right? Collecting a lot of data, understanding who his user is, and understanding what the KPI should be. So at this stage, a mobile app should be should be understanding what the key KPIs are, in the app funnel, and what they should be focusing upon. What are the benchmarks? So that's during the launch phase. I think during the growth phase, it's of course about acquiring a lot of users, but being conscious about what kind of a user you're acquiring, right? Meaning coming up with good KPIs and seeing to it that when you're running a campaign, an advertisement campaign, those KPIs are being achieved. And if you're not achieving those KPIs, weeding out those publishers or those networks who are not helping you achieve that. So that should be the focus during the growth phase. Then when it comes to retain, okay, you've acquired a lot of users. Now you understand what your users want, but you have to keep them interested. So maybe if you've upgraded your app, then let's educate the user about the upgrades you've made, right? So educating is important. Then let's reconnect with your users again and again. So maybe, so as we can see these days, taxi apps send me a notification, then hey, there's a 20% off if you take a cab on a Sunday. So somehow they're connecting with me. But I feel maybe this message is going out to everyone, so it's a little impersonal. So if they could personalize it, I think maybe I'll be engaging more with the app. Then again, maybe they're telling me about other products, so cross-selling, upselling, and using different retargeting techniques could help to maximize the LTV of a particular user. So yeah, so being aware of different techniques during the different phases is important. So launch, grow, and retain, and all these techniques that I talked about, if you mix them and use them properly, you can definitely increase your LTV.
Rohan shared things specific to, maybe just the mobile app world. But I'm sure that, from an agency side of things, you also don't just look at, mobile apps, but, mobile brands as a whole. And, user acquisition, retention, engagement on mobile as a platform. So do you have any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, I think just to take a step back, I think understanding what LTV is first is very important. And to see in that it's the value of a customer. That's not just revenue. It's clear that's a big part of it. But to work that LTV, you need to know the monetization of that user and what is their life cycle? What is that lifetime of that user and cohorts of different types of users. There are other values as well to a user of your app. They could provide virality to your app. They could tell their friends about it. That's additional value. So there's another thing to consider. They could provide feedback on your app and make sure that there's constant stream of communication between yourself as the app owner and your audience, so you know how to improve the app. So before we kind of go into the roles of just how much it costs to acquire a user, actually understand LTV is very important. Because once you understand that, then obviously it enables you to work out, forecasting the growth of your business. So that's I think it's a very important thing to start off before we go into very many different kind of areas, which is what we do with our clients.
It's the LTV, and also depending on what kind of app you have, it makes a big difference, as you were saying, how you monetize a user. So what we see is ride-sharing apps like Uber and the likes, they have a very high LTV because it's a very recurrent, even the normal user is going to be a very recurrent user. And then you have apps that could be better than they are in theory, like food ordering apps. It's surprising how unusual it is for people to actually order food when you consider that they eat every day. So they could potentially be using it twice a day or 3 times a day. Meanwhile, they use it once every 2 weeks when they're a good user. So trying to understand what is the LTV, how you calculate it, but also trying to understand what is going to be a power user and a base user and how you can try and get them to do it more often. Travel, as an example, is a bit of a hard one because you don't really know. A lot of users can use it once a month, once a week, if you're very lucky, or once a year. But you still want to be engaging and you want to keep that lifetime. So how long is lifetime? Is it 2 years? Is it 10 years? What am I going to do to engage those users? So I mean, trying to engage in terms of organic, or what we call organic, but email, push, whatever it is that you can do, plus trying to do something similar to that in terms of retargeting and trying to be smart about it, again, to try and bring them to convert more often, or as you said, invite friends or bring some value even if they're not necessarily purchasing or doing whatever it is. If you're like a messaging app, all the messaging apps have a lot of other things that they look into. Yeah. So tracking is a big one on that, because if you don't know what users are doing, you can't really know
how to measure.
Yeah, how to measure the return on ad spend even.
Yeah. I mentioned that you can also add a sort of a perspective by different countries. So do you see a difference in some of the things that you talked about in, say, emerging markets itself, right? Like a Latin America versus an India or Southeast Asia.
So you see differences in first how the users convert. Obviously, most markets iOS ends up being better. So a lot of the emerging markets being big Android bases, they tend to have a different split, which makes it difficult. What we also notice is some markets, some apps are winner takes all, and some apps are not. So some models, you can have multiple people, you can have multiple apps on your phone, like dating, and some are winner takes all. Classifieds, as an example, is usually winner takes all, so you have to fight. So it's about not just the users in each market, but like how much competition do you have in the market, and then how much you need to invest, not only to get good return and good lifetime value, but to make sure no one else is getting that user except from you, even when they're not necessarily converting.
Right.
What we notice is Brazil, Mexico, India, South Africa, Indonesia, they have similarities in terms of split and in terms of it being hard to find good users, so it being really important to optimize towards those events, so the return on ad spend. And Europe and the US being a bit more similar in the sense that it's more expensive to get an install, but then usually the conversions are slightly better. But depending on, like some markets like Mexico, only, I think it's like less than 30% of people have a credit card or a card that they can use for purchases. So the apps, if the app has been smart about how to make purchases happen, meaning you can go to a 7-Eleven and make a payment, those things make a big difference in those markets, while in the US and Europe, it's a bit easier. Brazil actually has a very high penetration of credit cards, so it's unlike those other markets. That's the main difference we see.
Add what Chris, Rohan, and Joana has added. Like one of the things that Mobvista is doing, which we believe that works, is first of all, like considering like the affiliate business, the network business, you need to have a control over the inventory that you have, because at times it just slips out of the blue, and you just lose the control. Right? So that's something that Mobvista is working towards it through the SDK inventory that we have got, which is owned by us. Plus, that also adds value for our clientele in terms of the user profiling that we do. So let's say Neeraj as a user, like what kind of apps does he use, what interest level does he have, right? Whether he is actually an avid shopper or not, whether he actually uses he's a transactional user or not, like be it a cab or be it a wallet, or be it the banking app, but yes, whether he's a relevant user for X client, be it e-commerce or be it anyone, like let's say the travel client. So yes, what you said is right. Let's say for a grocery or a food, the ticket size is small, so that recurring business is something which is going to come in terms of LTV. That window should be like, let's say 4 days or 5 days or 7 days as max. Whereas for a travel client, the LTV could be calculated within just 30 days. If he is active, he is making the purchases within the first 30 days. That is also being termed as a good user. That's something that I would like to add here.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind is if you got cross-device, it also comes to play. And that's usually a challenge, is understanding, because you might have an app and you bring the user to use the app. And if they're converting on desktop and you're not really connecting the two, it's hard to understand the value of that user on the app. Especially for travel, a lot of people will use the app for search, but they'll convert on desktop. So it's really important to be doing that cross-device, and so that when you retarget the users, you're very relevant. So dynamic product ads typically are very interesting. Just as push, it needs to be quite smart about, I'm going to push something to a user based on what they did, but also understanding what they've already done on desktop, so you don't try and push a product they already purchased on another device.
Yeah, so I think definitely that's an interesting point on the cross-device, because I think especially for retargeting and re-engagement, knowing the user view across devices, right, whether it's desktop or they came to the app through the mobile website or through the app, having that unified view becomes extremely critical, so that you're not repetitive and killing user engagement. So that's a great point. Also, just to follow up, Neeraj, so you mentioned a little bit about, the inventory aspect of things, and you mentioned something about, SDK and having,
Yeah.
So do you see a difference in user engagement rates, user LTV rates by the kind of inventory or the kind of various ad formats, right? Like a video versus native versus, display. Do you see a difference there?
Vasuta, to be true, there is a lot of difference actually when it comes to, you can say, a network inventory and a SDK inventory. Also, it actually makes an impact when it comes to a standard banner that we run and we ask for a video creative, which is let's say a 10-second or a 15-second at the max. Plus, Mobvista have got this technology on the platform wherein we can do native ads, right? And that actually works very well in terms of when you say native ads is something that I believe the way that we have seen for our clients is it's equivalent to what you get on organic, right? Because it's not intrusive, it's not something which is being pushed to the user. It's more of it's because it's a part of the content, so it's a clear-cut intent of the user who is just going on to it, downloading the app and doing whatever the post-install events that he is interested in. That actually makes it impact, wherein we clearly see that, okay, what kind of engagement that we are able to drive through a paid network, through a SDK inventory and through the native ads. That actually is very, very good, which is why when you go to the clients, they are actually interested in, and we make it identified for them. That makes it impact in front of the client as well, that he knows where his campaign or his app is being promoted, right? That's one. Plus, he knows that, okay, what kind of a user engagement that I'm getting. Like, he can actually, you can say, do a comparison within the network itself, right? Wherein he needs a scale, yes, he needs a high engagement user as well, right? So he can actually depict, like, okay, what kind of a scale that I'm getting and what kind of engagement. That is something that the SDK inventory is giving, or the creative assets that he is using with us is giving us.
Sure.
Yeah, we've noticed the same thing. Native actually performs really, really well. And video can perform well, but it performs well as a combination within the mix. I'm sure Chris has noticed that. And what we notice is typically OLX doing a lot of TV ads makes a big difference on conversions. So you actually get more, it does really impact. And Uber, we've seen it many times when the cab drivers take the streets and make a big fuss about Uber, the press talks about it, and then their conversions are amazing. Which means if you have offline going at the same time, it does really help. We also notice that native is number one, even though sometimes when you look at them, they don't look as good. They actually convert.
Can I jump in there? But of course, what we see is when we do TV advertisements, the installs do climb up. But what about the quality of the user, right? Is the person really interested in the app, or is it just a PR gimmick? Hey, we saw this on the TV, let's install it, but I'm never going to use it. Isn't that having a negative impact on the LTV of the app?
No. So when I talk about conversions, I mean within the app. I mean like in-app conversions. So actually,
so the in-app conversions are increasing. So they see something on TV, they install the app, and they make purchases.
So what happens often is there's a discovery side of installing an app.
Sure.
And then if you understand what the app's for, the odds of you using it are much higher. So when you have TV or the press talks about you, the conversions are higher because users understand what you're for, so they actually use the app rather than just downloading and saying, well, whatever, and deleting.
Okay.
Chris, anything to, yes?
Yeah, just to jump in, I think there's a lot of talk here about the paid media side, which obviously makes sense, considering where everyone panel is from. But I think it's important just to highlight just things. It doesn't cost you any money from a paid media perspective. You know, in terms of the user experience, this topic is about simple techniques to improve your LTV, and doing simple things like measurement, not just making sure you've got a robust MMP partner like AppsFly over here, and make sure you can measure everything. Because if you don't measure to the right metrics beyond the install to actual revenue, then basically you're not going to be able to work out the LTV, which is very important. And on top of that, there's a lot of the MMP data you get from app marketing doesn't always tie into your own BI data. So it's very important that you try and make everything seamless. There's always going to be a drop-off, but work off your own BI data. Don't work off the MMP data, just work out your true LTV. And work off your net revenue, because that's really what is your all working to. So just very important to highlight these things before you go down and spend how much you're going to spend, how much you're going to pay for cost per install, and all those things. You need to work these things out. And on top of that, just look after your customers. One thing we mentioned earlier about differences across all markets. One thing which is clear across all markets, if you don't engage the user in the first day with a good quality experience, you generally lose them. So first day, some stats you see, you can lose them in the first 4 seconds. If it's a bad consumer experience in the first opening of the app, you lose them forever. So make sure all the basics are done before you launch the app, before you spend paid marketing. You got everything in place to measure all the way to revenue, and you'll be in a good spot.
Actually, on that point, what we notice in e-commerce in the US, we've got quite a few clients, and the app experience on day one, super important, trying to be relevant in terms of what you show in terms of product when people first open the app, when they reopen, is such a big difference in terms of LTV and retention and people actually purchasing, especially if you're a big e-commerce and you sell a lot of stuff. And a lot of our clients, like Souk, or they're like Amazons of the world, because they sell everything, if your product isn't tailored to show people not exactly, but something that's relevant to their search, you lose them really quickly, or they don't convert on mobile. Mobile is a very different experience to desktop. It's not search, it's more discovery. Right. So you need to allow them to discover very quickly.
Yeah, and what I've observed is I think people don't really pay a lot of attention to App Store optimization. Even though maybe the mobile app is great, the product is great, but I've seen there's no App Store optimization which is done. So it doesn't really help them with the virality factor and getting the relevant users, you know. So I think people should pay attention to App Store optimization. It helps in getting the right users on board.
Sure.
And just to add, like what Joana said, like just to add to that, like in fact, in that case, the DMP even comes into picture, because it could not be just you can say a traditional pitch, or you can say traditional banner that we showcase to the users, right? Because in that case, he's just interested in that. For example, let's say Flipkart, people actually know about it. It could be a similar product available on a Snapdeal or Amazon. What he would be interested in is in actually the product which is that he might be interested in, wherein the DMP actually plays a part, right? Because he would like to be reached out at that point of time, wherein, let's say, we know the user behavior, right? Whether he has interest in, let's say, sports, whether he has interest in, let's say, fashion, what he is actually looking for. So that's something wherein I believe the DMP part comes into picture, so that we know what kind of a user profiling or the user that we are reaching out to. In that case, the engagement or the retention of the user will be much higher.
So maybe I'll just take a minute here, guys. So we have about 3 minutes left. So maybe we want to also open to the floor for any questions before we wrap up. So anyone, any questions, please feel free to address to the panel.
What are the tricks or techniques that you've used on short-term campaigns that have led to long-term results? Anything that you have out of your own experiences?
So I would say, in my experience, short-term campaigns never show you long-term results. But maybe, I mean, depending on why you're doing short-term, but what people call the burst campaigns, I always recommend clients not to do it, because your money is better spent if you try and slowly grow, knowing how to grow, understanding what kind of users you want to bring on, where you find them, how you talk to them, improving on the app. All these things come to play. So if you burst and then your app isn't the best it can be, you kind of wasted money too early. And rather spend that money on retaining the users, as he said, day 1 or day 2, day 3, but within the first 7 days, like you said as well, try and retain those. So I would always recommend rather start slow and do retargeting with the acquisition.
I agree.
Yeah.
Please. I mean, on the paid side, yeah, completely agree with that. Organics, if you have a good ASO strategy, to the point earlier, that doesn't take a huge amount of time to set up. That could be a short term. You can see the results in a month, and see some quality organic users come through on the back of that.
So what we've observed is that it depends on what the app is. If it's a gaming app, burst campaigns do help you climb up the charts, gets you a lot of organic users. But then will these organic users stay with you for a long time? It's questionable. But on non-gaming apps, what we've seen is we've never have suggested or consulted our clients that go for short-term campaigns. Always have a long-term view and perspective. So I think that's
I
what I
would
agree.
just add one tip I noticed some clients do that works well. On Android, you have the featured apps. Because on Android, they don't decline any apps. They have a lot of crap apps. While on iOS, you have to pass the standards, so they have better apps. So the Google people often want to have good apps to feature. So if you call up Google and the people who actually manage the Google Play, they can actually feature your app, and that's really good because that's organic, and then it can give you like a week of being featured and good organics.
And I think just to add maybe to that, I also think more viral videos, right? So which could be for the app or for a brand, tend to do well. I mean, they may not create long-term user engagement or LTV or retention, but there's still a brand recall factor that stays. So we've seen that clients who launch things with a viral video of sorts on social or even YouTube, etc. It creates some impact in terms of brand recall.
I just wanted to understand, do you calculate cost of acquisition versus long-term value, LTV, and say, okay, if for these particular customers, the cost of acquisition is much more than LTV, so we shouldn't be going after these customers. So do you do a periodic review and move the people out where cost of getting them is higher than the LTV?
I think that depends on what stage of growth you're at. If you're looking for aggressive growth, then you may be in a situation where you're happy to pay higher on a CPA than your LTV. But that's not sustainable. So once you get to a certain point, I mean, if you are a huge e-commerce company with huge investment than you're going to spend and be a position where you can pay less on more your CPA than your LTV, but over time it needs to balance out, and LTV needs to be more than your CPA
It's
for
always
sure.
a volume versus quality thing, because you can always have very good quality and the cost of acquisition will be lower if you're doing low volumes. You need to balance how much scale do I need. Again, if it's a winner takes all kind of app, market, industry, vertical, whatever you want to call it, then you're going to have to go big to spend to get the volume before your competitors do. Or if you're not, then you can just go very small volume and have very good cost of acquisition, but then you're not going to scale at that price. So you need to know how much you're willing to spend.
And how accurately are you able to measure it? Because long-term value could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So in digital, how accurately are you able to measure CAC versus LTV? Yeah.
No, so it depends.
How accurate would that be?
So defining the KPIs is important. Let's say for an e-commerce company, they say, okay, I got 10,000 users in a week. Out of these 10,000 users, how many of them went and searched for a product? How many of them added this product to the cart? So within a week, let's say out of this 10,000, 6,000 people added a product to the cart. They make an assumption, okay, I've got 6,000 relevant users from these publishers with whom I ran a campaign. So I think, LTV is historical data. You look back and say, okay, 2 years down the line, this is the money I've got. But then you need some proxies, you need some indicators, and that's why defining the KPIs, defining the benchmarks at the very early on is important. So
and retargeting, people think it's an added budget, but it's not. Because if you have, let's say, $200 and you spend it all on acquisition and people uninstall your app, you're better off spending 150 on acquisition and 50 on retarget, and you'll get more users at the end of the $200.
And in fact, CAC and LTV goes actually in correlation in hand, right? Because if the cost of acquiring a customer is going along with your RPI or your ROI, it will definitely add up to your LTV as well, right? And you can definitely, like once you have reached for a big brand, once you have reached to a certain point of user acquisitions, I think later on what you should be looking forward to is to engage those users, right? Simultaneously, like Joana said, like 150 plus 50, right?
I think we're getting buzzed out.
I don't know. Yeah, I think we're getting buzzed out of here. So any more questions? Maybe we can take them offline, right? Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening in.